Welcome back to Politics HQ. I'm Nick Rees, and now it's time for the big idea. Now, this is the segment where we give someone the soapbox and say, give us your big idea for a better Australia. We then have an expert panel who pulls the idea apart along with our guest pitcher. And the thing that makes it really exciting is that you get to vote on it at home by going onto Twitter and to the Twitter handle @Sky News. We've got a Twitter poll set up there now. You can go online and start voting. I had a little peek before the show started and pleased to report that voting is already running hot on tonight's topic. And that's no surprise because we've got Bob Carr, who was a long-serving Premier of New South Wales and, of course, Australia's Foreign Minister, someone who needs no introduction to the Sky News viewers. Welcome, Bob. Welcome to the show.
Nicholas, my pleasure to be with you.
Now, tonight, Bob, you're coming on to give us the pitch for the idea that Australia should moderate its rate of immigration. The soapbox is all yours, Bob. Go for it.
Good on you, Nicholas. I'm a great supporter of immigration. I'm a proven defender of multiculturalism. I think immigration, multiculturalism has made our country, well, the country that I and you love so deeply, that we're so fond of. But here's the idea. Australia's got currently the most ambitious rate of population growth in relative terms of any developed country in the world. Our population growth rate is more than Indonesia. It's really that of a third world country. And I don't think it would be remotely a bad thing if we were to take 5 years to add an extra million to our population instead of the 3.5 or 3 years that it's been taking in the last decade. Now, that's my proposition, that we should moderate the rate of population growth. And I'd like some of these hearty advocates of a big Australia to be honest with us about 3 subjects. About infrastructure. I'd like, for example, to hear the Business Council of Australia say that for every 25,000 extra citizens that immigration brings to Sydney or Melbourne, the Commonwealth should fund an extra, say, kilometre of bus transitways or underground rail. I'd like to have honesty on rezoning as well. I'd like some of the advocates of a big Australia to say that, yes, our ambitious immigration targets are going to require a pretty radical alteration in the densities of Australia's 3 biggest cities. And thirdly, I would just for once like to hear one of these advocates of a big Australia say we're going to have to work harder at reducing water use per household and at bringing down carbon emissions per head, that we ought to have sustainability targets built into our ambitious vision of an Australia that currently has the most ambitious immigration rate, the highest, the immigration rate of any developed country. I don't think it will hurt one little bit if instead of adding 1 million Australians every 42 months, we took a bit longer about it.
Well, there you have it, Bob. I know we've got a panel that's just bristling to get stuck into this one. So I'd like to bring into this conversation Tom Bentley and Judith Sloan. Tom Bentley was Julia Gillard's Deputy Chief of Staff, who's now at RMIT and a formidable policy analyst. And Judith Sloan, who is the contributing economics editor at The Australian, company director and also a very well-respected economist. Welcome, Tom. Welcome, Judith.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom, I might let you go first on this. What do you make of Bob's proposition? Got any questions for him?
Well, Bob, I think it's a very interesting idea that you raise, and I agree with you that it's important to have a kind of honest, upfront debate about all those issues that you laid out. But I do wonder whether focusing on the headline rate of net migration to Australia is really the way to have that honest and kind of long-term debate. You talk about our migration rate as being really a kind of third world country, but the net rate that we're closest to when you look at the international comparisons puts us closest to Sweden, to Switzerland and to Canada, none of which I think are third world countries. So I wonder whether there's a different angle and a slightly more moderate way into the discussion.
Well, we've got a population growth rate that I think's 1.8%. That's our population growth rate. It's faster than Indonesia's. We're growing our population faster than Indonesia. We're higher with that 1.8%, I believe, than most, if not all, developed countries. It might fluctuate year on year, but certainly we've been bumping along at the top range. And I don't think you could persuade many Australians that having an immigration program that brings an additional 80 to 100,000 into Sydney and Melbourne each year is not ambitious. And I don't think there are too many people who are looking at the challenge of infrastructure keeping up with that population challenge who wouldn't think that toning it down a bit wouldn't be a good thing. I think there's a bit of reality in this as well when we look at where the population growth will take place as we contemplate Australia's population reaching over 30 million in the next 15 years or so. And that is that we are talking about the denser urbanisation of the coastal strip of Eastern Australia. This is not a debate about filling up an empty continent. It's a debate about seeing that towards the end of this century, Australia's population will be concentrated in what we'd regard as Hong Kong-style towers in a densely populated, fertile coastal strip. And it's that geographic consideration that makes us fundamentally a different proposition than, say, North America, with its opportunity for inland cities provided by its healthy river system and by its Rocky Mountains. We're a different proposition and always have been.
All of that is very interesting, and I think that some of those challenges of better water use, more dense city populations, and how to invest in infrastructure are going to be really important for Australia, whatever the net migration rate. But I think we do have to get real a little bit in making comparisons with, say, Indonesia, because Indonesia has an overall population that is so much bigger than Australia's already. As you rightly said, Bob, Australia is a relatively young country and it's founded on immigration. Successive waves of its migration have made it a kind of energetic, diverse, outward-looking country. And as you said, you've been a staunch defender of multiculturalism. That's very, very important. The reason that Australia's net migration rate has gone up in the last 10 years is really about a short-term increase in the number of temporary long-term people who are coming to Australia on business 457 visas and on student visas. Now, you could have a discussion about the effects of that on the economy and how to make that a good thing. And you would need to focus on how to invest in public goods like education and health and infrastructure. But I'm still not totally sure that headlining with the need to bring down this kind of fabled population rate is the right way to have the discussion.
Just a reminder to viewers that you can have your voice heard on this debate by making your views heard on the hashtag PoliticsHQ on Twitter, or better still, go and vote. You can vote at the Twitter handle Sky News Australia, and at the end of the show, we'll reveal what the results of that poll were. But I want to bring Judith Sloan into this debate. What's your view, Judith?
Well, I think Bob's basically right. And it's not actually just because of temporary migration. If you look at the figures, what's called the immigration program, which is the permanence, that's been increasing each year. There was a bit of a stalling at the time of the GFC, but it's just been going up and up and up. You know, 120, 130. We're now at 190,000. And if you look at what are called net overseas migration, so that does include some temporaries, although not all of them. What we're finding is that in terms of population growth, migration actually is accounting for more than half. So I think it is really important to debate this, because the pro-immigration lot will say, well, the issue is that there's not enough investment in infrastructure, in public transport, in schools, hospitals and the like. But the truth of the matter is 70% of these migrants go to Sydney and Melbourne, and up to a point it's impossible to keep up with the infrastructure needs of such a sort of ongoing surge in the numbers. So I think it would be very good public policy to reduce the annual intake. The one group we can control mainly is, in fact, the permanent immigrants, and see how we go for a period of time. I think what Bob Carr is suggesting is, in fact, quite a modest proposal. You know, instead of getting a million more people in 3.5 years, he's suggesting we get that in 5. Now, I think a lot of people would think that's fine.
So I should probably jump in at this point and declare my conflict. I am, in fact, an immigrant to this country myself, having moved here with my family when I was a small boy from England. And, you know, I guess I've seen our lives sort of, you know, get better and better as a result of moving to this fantastic country. And isn't that the story of Australia? You know, we've got this, we've built our prosperity off the back of that huge immigration program, which, sure, it has some stresses and strains in it. Yes, there are some issues around, you know, new communities becoming fully fledged members of our society. Yes, there are problems with stresses and strains on infrastructure. But overall, it's been an overwhelmingly positive thing for this country. And countries that don't have strong immigration programs often get themselves into a lot of trouble. And probably the best example of that is Japan, where because of such strong public opinion against immigration to that country, they have allowed, and there's been a drop in their birth rate. They now have this sort of demographic time bomb, which is ticking, which is, you know, has seen them lose 20 years of good economic growth. So a properly managed immigration program, a properly managed big immigration program, surely is a good thing for our economy.
No,
Judith?
No. I mean, just, you know, I mean, there's a lot of cliches in all of that, dare I say it, you know, saying, you know, we're an immigrant country, you know.
Sorry for showing a little bit of heart there, Judith.
Well, no, I think, I just don't, if you look at the economic analysis of the impact of immigration, you have to determine what impact it has in per capita terms, right? You know, there's no point, of course it makes the economy bigger, but it's actually what happens in per capita terms. And the Productivity Commission, for example, found an incredibly modest positive impact of immigration 40 years down the track. And the interesting thing is that the reason they can find a positive economic impact is that the wages of the groups that compete with the migrants, and because we have a sort of relatively skill-biased ones, they're held back because of the migrants. Now, if you happen to be a local with skills that allowed, the benefits of which are effectively allowed to be competed away by migrants, you might have a really different view on it. And I think that's where the economics actually starts to hit the road in terms of the politics.
Bob Carr, what about comparisons between, say, Melbourne and Sydney? So, you know, Sydney has got its beautiful harbour, it's surrounded by mountains and the Royal Park and the Blue Mountains. Melbourne is surrounded by open plains, and certainly over the last decade or more now has been accepting a significantly larger number of new immigrant arrivals than Sydney, and that seems to have been fairly well accepted by the city. Would you accept the politics is different between, say, Sydney and Melbourne on this issue? No,
not at all. I think the pressures are there in both cities. I get enormous confirmation of concern, that there is concern in Melbourne about the rate of population growth. Everything you said a moment ago, Nicholas, about the benefits of immigration are real to me. I see it all around me. But the logic of your position is that, OK, all these benefits flow, why not have 1 million a year? Why not have 1 million a year? It's all about the level, about the degree, and I just think that there aren't many people who live in Sydney and Melbourne who wouldn't agree that we'd get by perfectly adequately by moderating the rate of increase. As I said, 1 million every 3.5 years at the present time. What would be the disaster in a moderation of the intake so that the 1 million is added to the Australian population every 5 years? But I'd just love to have some honesty in Canberra. These decisions are made in Canberra. Canberra has the lowest density of any capital city in Australia. I just wish some of the advocates of big immigration in Canberra would say, yes, but this puts an obligation on us. Canberra has cut grants to the states by 80 billion and then says to the states, your budgets will accommodate the burden, the challenge of these very high immigration intakes. And this is an example, to me, of the lack of honesty in this debate. The lack of honesty, too, about what high immigration means for higher densities. None of the people who beat their chest and say, I believe in a bigger Australia, deliver a stern lecture to the populations of Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane about what this means in terms of changing the character of so many Australian suburbs. And what it means in the longer term as you contemplate a population of 30 of 35 million in terms of the east coast of Australia, the intensification of densities right up that narrow, fertile coastal strip. So I'm making a plea for honesty in the debate. I love immigration, I love multiculturalism, but we've got to be a whole lot more honest. Judith is right. There's a host of work in the United Kingdom. They had very high immigration under Tony Blair. It continued under the Cameron government. And the reports, every last report has said the economic benefit it brings is not to the existing population. Migrants move into the UK and they achieve certain benefits, but the existing population, according to all these studies, simply does not. And it's GDP growth per head, not a simple growth in the size of the economy, is what ought to focus our attention.
That's what's important, sure. Bob, thank you so much. This is obviously one of those debates that we probably should have dedicated a full hour to. I feel like we're really just getting started. I'm going to ask our panellists to give us their verdict. And of course, a reminder to viewers at home that they can vote on this issue by going to Twitter and voting at the Sky News handle. Tom Bentley, what's your verdict on this one?
My verdict is you could moderate the immigration rate a little bit. And as Bob actually said, it's really quite a modest proposal. It's not a kind of fundamental change. It's actually not going to solve the pressures and the issues that he's talking about. And the reason I'm concerned about it is it's really a distraction, perhaps in the wrong hands, even a dangerous distraction from some of the deeper issues that we really need to be discussing in Australia.
Judith, very quickly from you.
Yes, I'm voting for Bob. And I think he makes an incredibly good point about Canberra determines the numbers, but basically the financing requirements associated with the larger numbers are picked up by the states. And that, I think, is a real pressure point.
All right. And look, and as for me, I'd say the immigration rate's probably about right as it is now. So, Bob, looks like amongst our panel, it's 2 yeses and 1 no. Thank you so much for giving us your time tonight, Bob Carr. And, of course, a reminder to viewers that you can vote on Twitter at Sky News Australia. And at the end of the show, we'll tell you the results. Thanks so much, Bob. See you all after the break. Unfortunately, we are rapidly running out of time, and I do want to let you know what the results were of our Twitter poll tonight. So we had a huge response from viewers, and we also got a strong, clear response as well in terms of the vote, with 64% of people saying yes, Australia does need to moderate its immigration intake, 27% of viewers saying no, and 10% of people saying needs more work. Tom and Judith, any thoughts about that? Are you surprised by that result?
No, I'm not.
I'm not surprised at all, no. I think it's kind of par for the course, but it's kind of good to know where people are.
Yeah, immigration, it's always a tough issue to debate in this country, and I guess we saw the sentiment pretty clearly from viewers tonight.
The point is that what was being put on the table was quite a modest proposition, right? So no one's saying we need to halt the immigration program. We're just saying it needs to be moderated. And indeed, I think there are certain details of some of the regulations that need to be looked in. It's interesting that Julia Gillard had a bit of a crack at doing it, trying to limit particularly the extent to which international students who graduate here could be guaranteed of permanent residence. And when she did that, I thought she did that quite sensibly.
Yeah.
There was a tremendous backlash by the universities, and it was basically, you set up a dodgy review by a dodgy person, and it was overturned. But so I think other message in it's actually there are a lot of vested interests in the immigration program, particularly employers, being where it is.
That's also true. And the vested interests are in
Very quickly, Tom.
banks and elsewhere. But the key to it, if you're going to change any of these things, is to make sure that the systems are really properly run, not run on the basis of kind of big headlines.
All right, Tom Bentley, thank you very much. Judith Sloan,
pleasure.
Thanks for joining us in the studio. That's all we have time for Politics HQ. Coming up next is the Perrott Report. So from me, good night.